The most exciting new reveal from the PlayStation State of Play was absolutely Tides of Annihilation, a brand new action-adventure title coming from a brand new studio known as Eclipse Glow Games, a subsidiary of Tencent. Just like how Shifter made their first steps into the AAA single-player games market with Stellar Blade or Game Science with Black Myth Wukong, along with S-Game as well, developing Phantom Blade Zero set to likely release in 2026. And we can't forget the fantastic looking Lost Soul Aside. This right here is another fantastic title of yet another really cool looking action game coming from an Eastern developer, as Eclipse Glow Games are Chinese devs. This one right here though is particularly standout, melding the themes of medieval fantasy in with modern day reality? This game is described as being inspired by Arthurian Legend, so the stories we all know about King Arthur, Merlin, or Excalibur are some of the driving forces behind the themes that we have here in Tides of Annihilation. But it's this really cool setup of these two completely separate worlds almost colliding with one another. In this shot here, we can see the Big Ben lying in a blood-filled Thames River, with old era church spires scattered throughout modern day London. In this shot, we can see a destroyed London Eye, with Victorian era buildings off in the background. But then we'll notice that the platform that the main character Gwendolyn is walking up here is actually a raised piece of modern day road, along with some cars here, a street light, a phone booth, and even a traffic light. But off in the distance, you'll see buildings from modern day London. It is this really unique theme of blending old era in with new era, and actually heavily reminds me of Tetsuya Nomura's take on reality based on fantasy. Though I guess you could say in this case, this is very much more so fantasy based on reality, or some interesting halfway point. But then we see some other locations throughout the trailer that quite clearly aren't set in modern day London, but are rather in a complete fantasy world. This is known as Avalon, whether it's desert ruins or somewhere high up in the mountains. So it seems as if it's this big journey of going between locations from our known world and the world of Avalon. It's funny actually, this game really reminds me of Square Enix's Forspoken, and I know for some of you guys out there, you might be scared off by this comment. Don't worry, I think the quality of Tides of Annihilation is going to be much higher. This is looking a lot more promising than Forspoken ever was, and this is coming from someone that actually enjoyed Forspoken. I don't think it was as bad as most people thought it was. Apparently the world that we know was engulfed by an outworld invasion. The main character Gwendolyn finds that she's the only survivor and discovers a mysterious power to command the legendary Knights of the Round Table. Apparently we'll be uncovering the truth behind the Grey Fog. This could be the thing that brought both of these worlds together and created the invasion from the world of Avalon into the world that we know. But it is kind of isekai-ish judging by that description. But it's the gameplay that really caught my attention. This is an action-adventure title, so along the same lines as something like the modern God of War. The thing is though, when I saw that combat system, ooh man, the DMC inspiration that is funneling through the veins of this title is so good. It wasn't long ago that I was talking about how it appears that there is a resurgence within the games industry for fast-paced, third-person action hack-and-slash title, leaning away from Souls-like and more into just classic straight-up action. And this is yet another one, though in comparison to something like Phantom Blade Zero or Black Myth Wukong, this one right here is looking more along the lines of Devil May Cry or something like Lost Soul Aside, which is really reminiscent of those action games we used to get throughout the PlayStation 2 and Xbox 360 era. And the good news is, we actually have some information from the devs themselves coming from WCCF Tech, breaking down what we need to know about it. They asked if the combat system is more like Devil May Cry and Bayonetta or more like a Souls-like game. The combat gameplay is definitely more DMC. Unlike most Souls-like titles, we also have difficulty mode selection. From the concept, we have implemented fairly simple controls for those players who would like to actually play action games without being hardcore users. So that DMC DNA is absolutely here. Now we know that Gwendolyn has somehow acquired the powers of the Knights of the Round Table, and these are her unique abilities that she can use within combat. In fact, she can actually summon these Knights of the Round Table to fight alongside her. The entire combat system seems to revolve around around the system of summoning knights and using their abilities. The PlayStation blog describes this as being intuitive co-op combat in a single-player experience. The interplay between Gwendolyn and the knights creates a dynamic, fast-paced, and deeply engaging combat experience. Because there are a ton of knights from the round table, like there's a lot here, I would say there's going to be quite a few different ones to select. All of these knights are described as providing different playstyles. So I wonder if, depending on what knight you have currently equipped, dictates also the special abilities that Gwendolyn herself can pull off. The Steam page actually shows us this little gameplay clip of combat with you teaming up with one of the knights right here. We can see that there are currently 2 attacking this enemy. There's even a little moment where we're cooperatively juggling this guy. So it looks like, yeah, if you're good enough, you can perform the good old DMC-esque juggles. But while it appears that there's 2 knights fighting here, in actual fact, there's a total use of 4 knights. So it might even lean more into what Final Fantasy XVI did with icons. You can use the power of multiple different knights equipped into your ability slot, and you can have 1 or 2 out on the field assisting you. I mean, this ability right here with the knight who clearly punches people has an attack that is just like a 1-to-1 of Titan's charge up move from Final Fantasy XVI. They asked if there's any RPG elements within the game. They mentioned that there are levels and that there are skill trees, but it's not really heavy on that. So again, this is leaning more towards classic action. In regards to outfits or armors, you can find equipment out in the world. However, these are primarily cosmetic, and there's no stat benefits to equipping them, so very similar to Stellar Blade. They asked about weapons and if there are going to be multiple weapons, considering that a game like DMC revolves around Devil Arms, and depending on what weapon you have equipped completely changes up the playstyle. They responded, yes, there are in fact 4 weapons in the game. They have swords, bows, fists, and apparently the dev forgot the 4th one. I believe we only saw gameplay of the sword being used. I love the fact that fists are going to be in this. If we can have a Balrog type weapon set up in Tides of Annihilation, that would just be supreme. Considering that this game is coming from a Chinese developer, they were asked why they decided to go with a Western setting. The developer mentioned that this game and Black Myth Wukong are 2 projects invested in by Tencent, so Tencent set different expectations on these 2 projects. Black Myth Wukong targeted the Chinese market, but for this project, we targeted a Western audience and decided to go with Arthurian Legends. This is why they've decided to reach out to a Western journalist outlet to talk about the game to generate more feedback, as of course we as the Western audience certainly have opinions and expectations when it comes to the presentation of Western settings. The devs want to ensure that they're getting everything right before the final version is released. At the end of 2024, the game was in alpha stage, and throughout 2025 it seems like the game is shifting into the beta stage. They're currently targeting a release window of 2026. Thank God for that, because 2025 is too bloated as is. A really interesting question that was asked was, if the game turns out to be successful, would they plan on doing other mythologies based around the same concept, a character going into the world, the setting, the environments of other mythologies from other cultures. They mentioned that we would change the protagonist, but we would still want to use the outworld invasion concepts that we're using for Tides of Annihilation. Gaming has been diving deep recently into the exploration of multiple different cultural myths and legends. Black Myth Wukong obviously gave us a game based around Chinese myths. God of War is focused on both Greek and Norse mythology. While it's not exactly a new thing to base a game around a certain cultural mythology, the presentation of how these mythologies have been used in recent years has been really cool, to learn more about these legends and myths that come from cultures that are not of our own, and this is yet another example of which. You could say though that Arthurian Legend has been used quite prominently. I mean, a lot of the medieval games that we have right now are inspired through those legends, and especially when we're looking at something like Elden Ring or the Dark Souls franchise, From Software took a lot of inspiration from these exact myths and legends. That's probably why when you look at some of the world and enemy design throughout Tides of Annihilation, it is kind of reminiscent of stuff you would come across in either Elden Ring or Dark Souls. The game is set to be over 30 hours of gameplay, so this is pretty standard place for games like this. Looking at Black Myth Wukong, it comes in at around about the same time, and the same can also be said for Stellar Blade. In my opinion, this is a perfect amount of gameplay time for a game like this. There's also going to be just over 30 bosses in the game, each with their own abilities. Players will have to prepare for very challenging boss fights. Keep in mind though, there is difficulty options there for people who are wanting more of a challenge or for those who are wanting an easy breezy experience. Also, for Shadow of the Colossus fans out there, it looks like you might get a slight Shadow of the Colossus fix through this game. You might notice some of the Colossals that are seen throughout the trailer. These are described as being interactive challenges that are apparently woven into gameplay, so just like how you approach the Colossi in Shadow of the Colossus, you'll have to scale these bad boys, and I guess they kind of act as a puzzle of sorts. I imagine all of these will be different though. It's not to say that we'll be climbing absolutely all of them. Some might involve more platforming, whereas others might involve more combat. It also mentions being able to delve into these colossal knights' palatial depths and uncover the grand tales that define their existence. So, some of the actual stories that these knights are based on, seems like there's going to be heavy references to those actual narratives in a way when looking at taking on these colossal challenges. So for the loreheads out there that are really deep into the Arthurian legends, you'll probably get a kick out of this. And lastly, talking about the visuals of the game, we don't know what engine this is running on. I would have to assume probably Unreal Engine. Not sure if it would be 4 or 5. If I were to guess, probably 5. If it didn't have this incredibly unique theme going on, then it probably wouldn't be as standout, but because of that theme, this really is quite breathtaking for a game that's positioned within this genre. The game just looks incredibly atmospheric. The designs too are just top tier, like this big whale thing that comes out of the Thames here, and it's got like some cathedral looking building built onto its back. You know, just the type of thing you would sort of expect from Miyazaki and From Software. Now later on today, there is actually going to be an 11-minute gameplay showcase that will be released by the devs, giving us a better look at how this game actually plays. But as a basis and for the time being, that's everything you need to know about Tides of Annihilation. Certainly a game that you should have on your radar. Between this, Phantom Blade Zero, Lost Soul aside, Ninja Gaiden 4, we are eating so well when it comes to this genre of video game. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this video. Leave your thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below about Tides of Annihilation. I'd love to know. Slap that like button as it helps me out, and subscribe to the channel to keep up with everything going on here. A big thank you to my wonderful patrons. I appreciate the support. I hope each and every one of you are having a fantastic day, and we'll talk again real soon.